Hi everybody, this is Caroline, and today I'm doing the 4th episode of this Paranormal ASMR series, and today's going to be a little more casual. I have been gone for about 2 months. I got a new job, so I've been busy, but I also, since doing my Bigfoot video, have kind of found myself deep in paranormal theories, the kind of theories that you gotta dig for deep in Reddit. It's been interesting, and I've found a lot of patterns in these stories and theories, and it's taken me a while to put out a new video because I've been trying to think of a way to organize this and bring these ideas to you, and I want to do it well. But today, in the meantime, I'm going to share this Reddit thread that some of you may have already read or heard about. It's a search and rescue thread created by a search and rescue officer who's worked in a number of U.S. national and state forests, and in this thread he shares several experiences that he's had over the years that are really just totally unexplainable. These stories are really creepy. I don't get spooked too easily, but this definitely kept me up after I read it. Anyway, the reason I'm sharing it though is because a lot of the stories he shares, they resemble other theories and ideas I've come across in this paranormal sphere. And so even though this isn't a summary per se, it touches on a lot of the elements that I want to expand on later in the series. So I'm thinking after this episode where I read this thread to you all, I'm going to take pieces of this story and expand on it and really delve deep into different ideas around these different experiences. I know this sounds vague, but once I start reading, I think you'll get a better idea of what I mean. Okay, so let me get started. So it starts out by saying, I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old stay where you are thing and they don't wander far. But I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sisters were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both the kids apparently wandered off. When the parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he had been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched that area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. So this is what I mean, is that I could do a whole video just on berry patches and the weird things that people have reported. For now, we're going to continue. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her Her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could possibly have gone, because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. A few times I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me straight up cliffs. Not hills, not even rock faces. Straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases we usually find the persons on the other side of the cliff or miles away from where the canine had led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevice with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He had been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper and heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine, and when he'd gotten up to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get up the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night, climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. That one I think is the scariest I read, one of them. Faceless people is another element I've come across several times, and I think I've even talked about it in past videos, a story of someone who saw a faceless woman. I think that might have been my first episode, but yeah. Now I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken, regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 or 40 miles, at some point we'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very emphatically that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because it happens so frequently. So that was the end of the first part, and I'm just gonna keep going and keep sharing stories. I think there might be 7 parts, but I'm not gonna be able to get to all of them today. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls. People who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire, get bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases, where we never find any trace of them, so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a van to make sure that we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly a call comes over the radio telling us all to head back to the vet's location, and we came right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up and the vet is just standing at the base of the tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up to the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle had been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually the search is called off, because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point there's not much we can do. We did our best to find him, but it's almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a My dog is eating. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scented trail and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile where he'd last been. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, and I was glad for it because I'm really not good with kids. As my trainer and I headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places she's found people in the past. I see something in the distance. Now this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on estate protected land, which means there can't be any commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely, but the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I asked her what this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm hard. I wouldn't do that, she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up to them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest search or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, all different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like it came out of a turn of the century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal, don't worry about it, they're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. As someone who spends literally all of their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared being alone or out in the middle of nowhere. That's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about them and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever made me seriously consider if this job is the right one for me. I don't really like talking about it much, but I'll do the best I can to remember it all. As I recall, this took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child call, a 4-year-old girl who had wandered away from her family's campsite and had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent and told us what most parents do. My kid would never wander away. She's so good about staying close. She's never done anything like this before. We assure parents that we'll do everything we can to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was partnered with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversation while we hiked. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, and I think to a certain extent, you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We searched for a good 2 hours, going well beyond where we think she'd be, and we come out of a small valley when something makes us both stop in unison. We freeze and look at each other, and there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop, and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. It's almost like a freight train passing directly by us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can't hear him over the deafening roar. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us, trying to find the source of the sound, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my first thought is a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs, and even if we were, it would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell to each other, but even standing close together, we can't hear anything but this sound. Then, as suddenly as it starts, it stops, like something threw a switch and cut it off. We stand there for a second, perfectly still, and slowly the normal sound of the woods come back. He asks me what happened, but I just kind of shrug, and we're standing there looking at each other for a minute. I get on the radio and ask if anyone else just heard the end of the fucking world, but no one else hears it, even though we're all within shouting distance of each other. My buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we check up on the radios and no one's found the little girl. Most of the time, we won't search when it's getting dark, but because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decide to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep close together, and we're calling out for her every couple of minutes. At this point, I'm hoping, beyond hope, that we find her. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight. At night, it's a whole different beast. But we're not seeing any signs of her, or getting any responses, and around midnight, we decide to turn around and head back to the rendezvous point. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines his light to the right of us, into a really thick deadfall, or group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet for a second and listen. I do, and in the distance I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just really faint crying. We head in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my gut, and I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are and call the girl's name again, and this time we both figure it out. The crying is a loop. It's the same hitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time, and without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we go back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but the call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the people who we've never found, but frankly I doubt if we'll ever find anything. I think there are 7 parts, so I'm just gonna skim and see which were the best stories. Okay, this is a good one. This is a friend of the SAR officer. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is supposed to be apparently the best in her field. So one of her stories is extra creepy, so let me find it. Her initials are KD. This is a story that KD told was something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was still a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation, belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group, but I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize that I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't I got turned around lost. I mean, I had literally no clue where I was. If you'd asked me, I don't even think I'd been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do. So I stood up for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stand there, the more confused and turned around I get. So I started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. And as I'm walking, it just is getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head almost, like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky, and it's telling me over and over, it's okay, you just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. So I started looking around for anything I can eat, and I swear to God, I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless, and I think I'd have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out there when I hear an actual voice coming towards me. I go toward it and see one of the other SARs, and he looks terrified. He's running toward me and asks if I'm okay and what I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, as he's running toward me, I kind of see myself reaching for my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing, but what I am thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me doing that and backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away, that he's not gonna hurt me, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for half an hour or so. He tells me I've been gone for 2 days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain, and if I kept going, I would have ended up wandering about 300 miles of wilderness. They'd never have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course I don't know what to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't see anything. I just go back to him to the rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to a hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. That's so creepy. So, there's a lot more to this thread, so I'll post it if you want to keep reading. Thank you for listening, and like I said, I'm gonna go into more detail about some of these specific encounters and ideas, and tease them out a little bit and talk about some theories behind them. Stay tuned for more episodes, and thanks for watching.